identifying culture that are intrinsic to the identity of Indigenous peoples who are already facing a wealth of socioeconomic problems, and then having their cultural stolen and used in a way that denigrates them or lessens their identity. And this is what we're talking about. And so as building automatic speech recognition, we're collecting a lot of audio, collecting and taking in audio from the community with permission, but it's also a lot of sacred information that we're taking in. And so it's important that as we're moving forward with technology, that we're not continuing the same pattern of exploitation, this degenerative cycle of steal, 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 and let the indigenous survive with the scraps. What we really need, what we're proposing here is a new model of regenerative economics for the community, so they can take their information and their identities and use it in a way that regenerates the community and contributes to the greater society.
A recent EFF-Austin virtual meeting featured Michael Running Wolf and Caroline Running Wolf, tech activists who use immersive technologies and AI to enhance Indigenous language and culture. They feel such projects require a cautious and respectful approach, avoiding exploitative behavior and honoring Indigenous nations' right to maintain privacy and secrecy of sacred data.
Michael Running Wolf was raised in a rural village in Montana with intermittent water and electricity, with grandparents who only spoke their tribal languages, Cheyenne and Lakota. These languages, like many other Indigenous languages, are near extinction. It is through this lens, combined with his Masters of Science in Computer Science and professional experiences with Amazon, IBM, AT&T Wireless, and Lawrence Livermore National Lab, that he found his true passion: endangered Indigenous language revitalization using XR, AR/VR technology. Michael now works to strengthen the ecology of thought represented by Indigenous languages through the intersection of virtual augmented reality and artificial intelligence. Caroline Running Wolf, Apsáalooke, née Old Coyote, is a multilingual cultural acclimation artist dedicated to supporting Indigenous language and culture vitality. She is currently pursuing her PhD in anthropology at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Her research explores potential applications of immersive technology, AR, VR, XR, and artificial intelligence to effectively enhance Indigenous language and culture reclamation. She is also passionate about Indigenous data sovereignty and AI ethics. Now, to give just a quick little intro what they're going to be talking to us about before I turn things over to them, this is going to be a talk that is going to be an introduction to the intersection of revitalizing sacred knowledge through new media and exploitation of this data. For centuries, Indigenous peoples of the Americas have resisted the loss of their land, technology, and cultural knowledge. This resistance has been enabled by vibrant cultural protocols unique to each tribal nation, which controls the sharing of and limits access to sacred knowledge. Technology has made preserving and presenting this information in new ways easy, but there is a tension between reigniting ancient knowledge and mediums that allow uncontrollable exploitation of this data. New media opens a new path for revitalizing and sharing heritage, but creating Indigenous cultural experiences requires special care to avoid exploitative behavior. And to explain what all that means and really delve deeply into these issues that many of us may not have thought about before, and I hope we're all going to learn a lot about tonight, I'm going to hand things over to Michael and Caroline.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for that introduction. I started sharing the screen and I'm not sure, can you see it? Yay, awesome. So yeah, you already said pretty much everything. So just a quick outline. We're gonna do a quick intro of who we are and where we're coming from, and then talk a bit more about Indigenous protocols for AI and go into what's next. And we're really excited about the amount of time that this session has, because that means we can have some really great conversations and Q&A, and that's what we're looking forward to. So don't expect us to be monologuing here for 2 hours. So you already heard a lot about who we are. So my tribe is pronounced Apsáalooke, and from my mom's side, I'm German. And my expertise background is I'm a former nerd herder and polyglot.
And I'm Michael Running Wolf, the husband. That's pretty much all you got to say. So me and Caroline are enemy tribes, and we actually both are stereotypical. And so we're actually the stereotypical feather Indian, so to speak, or Native American. We prefer, it depends on the country. So in Canada, I'm learning the hard way that Native is pejorative. And Native in the in the United States of America is okay, but it's not so okay in Canada. So they prefer First Nations. But if you want to be extra careful, which I prefer, you go with Indigenous. And so we are the stereotypical North American Indigenous, the feathers. And here's a picture of Caroline's tribe. So the little triangle is where we are from, roughly. The homelands of the Cheyenne, Lakota, and the Crow, even they had a homeland, I suppose that might matter, are anywhere from the Rockies all the way down to Texas and all the way over to the Mississippi. And there's just like the territory of the Plains Indigenous Peoples. And we are currently in Vancouver, BC, way over in the far corner up there.
That little orange star.
Yeah, and we're working with we'll talk about it more in the project, but these are the area we're working with on our scientific project to build automatic speech recognition. Yeah,
so you might know it as Vancouver, British Columbia, but it's actually the traditional Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and unceded territory. So what we're talking about and what we've been working towards for the past 6 or 7 years now is this dream that we have to build accessible, immersive, Indigenous AI technology. And the goal just being to empower the community, build capacity, and just assist with the communities, the various Indigenous communities, and their efforts of reclaiming their languages, cultures, identities, worldviews, while using, these kind of technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, all of that. And something that Michael likes to point out, I don't know, he's not talking, so I'll just continue, is that all of these basic technologies like augmented reality or virtual reality, machine translation, voice assistance, all of that exists already today, but it does not exist for Indigenous languages. And that's kind of where we're at right now, is realizing that ASR is the hard part.
And so what Caroline means is that from a fundamental technical problem perspective, VR, AR experience, all these experiences do exist. They're very in the very early stage right now. And then maybe I don't know, maybe at least another 5 years before it's more mainstream, and it's getting cheaper. So when we first started, VR headsets cost around $1,000. Now you can buy one from Amazon or Walmart or Hudson's Bay, I assume, for about 300 to 400 Canadian or $300 US. And but the problem though is that we found is that as we were building on this path of we wanted to get the headset, put it on, and have a Lakota experience. So you put it on there, you're talking Cheyenne, or you're talking Tatavian from California, or even Crow, if one wants to denigrate themselves to speak that language, or Navajo, put it on and have an interaction and be able to speak your language and have like these gamified experiences where you can interact with your culture and also be able to have like this fulfilling experience in VR and also in a private way, so that when you're learning a second language, it's very difficult. And often when the first second language learner, as you're learning your language for the first time, you become shy. And so in VR, it's been shown that it helps people learn German, English, other languages, these primary languages, pretty easily because it's immersive, and then also you're not shy because you're just talking to a computer. But that doesn't exist. The fundamental science does not exist for automatic speech recognition. For instance, the languages of the West in Europe and also in Asia, like in China, are not very polysynthetic. And I have to be very careful with the way I phrase this because I have linguist friends and they're probably here in the room. And so what happened is, so I'll just pick on the West and the European languages, is that because of an accident of history, languages in Europe, particularly Western Europe, do not have this feature called polysynthesis. And polysynthesis can be best explained by the compound nouns of German, where you can have like a Volkssicherheit, people's safety. And you see that a lot when you're looking at German signs. Like you see these big, huge, long words, and that's a compound noun. And that is weak polysynthesis. For North American languages, the majority of North American languages have this feature where we can take a concept, and in linguistic terms, this is called a morpheme, and you can modify that morpheme with other morphemes and other modifiers. And so you can create an infinite amount of words. And so some languages don't even have nouns per se. They're just entirely verb-based, some of the Coastal Salish languages. And what this means is that you can compact the benefit of these languages, you can compact a lot of information. So when I talk about Caroline's cat, for example, I can talk about the vector in which it's heading, the relative distance to me, its gender, and whether or not I care about that cat, all within one word. And the limits
and
here
the fact that it's my cat and not yours.
Yes. Yeah. And so, and this is really important. And it's also what the other side effect though is that a dictionary doesn't make sense, because to have a dictionary, you need to have atomic words. And so English is an atomic language. We just say red car, two separate words, red and car. And in a North American polysynthetic languages, you may have the red car that my brother owns that's heading north, in one word. Yeah, fast. Past tense or present tense, it all depends. And so the technology assumes that you have a finite dictionary for atomic words, and when you do when you're talking to a automatic speech recognition, for instance, Siri or Google Assistant, and you're saying, say, hey Siri, turn on my lights. For polysynthetic languages, you would need to say, hey Siri, annotate her, or conjugate that phrase correctly to Siri, that it's a robot that you don't know and you're definitely not having an affair with, and turn on the lights that are over there to the north. And all these things need to be solved. It's just in machine learning, it's not been solved. So from a fundamental perspective, it's just not been done. And it's really just an issue of that Western languages don't have this property, so they never had to solve it technologically.
So on this slide, Michael just immediately jumped to the last bullet point, which is it's not English. And he explained to you some of the many ways how North American Indigenous languages are not English. There are other challenges, of course, to creating automatic speech recognition for Indigenous languages. And the biggest ones are the fact that it's low resource, and low resource can mean everything from that there's not a lot of machine trainable audio and text corpus, that some tribes don't have that many speakers left, or maybe even no first language speakers left and only language learners, which is, also quite a challenge and an obstacle for creating machine learning. And even such simple things like electricity, and of course, AI technicians and data scientists. So low resource is a big term for many factors. And then, of course, we have the factors of competing orthographies or very, very diverse so-called dialects, geographical barriers. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Two of the projects we're working on, they have all of these bullet points going for or against them, however you want to see it. So yeah, it's quite an issue. And then on top of it all, polysynthetic, not English.
Kind of to bring home to why we're talking about it to you is that in addition to the technological and social problems, we are also facing appropriation. tribes, not the crow, are considered sexy and interesting, like the Hawaiians, for example.
The crow are sexy too.
Yes, I married one.
You married me.
One. We're married, by the way, so it doesn't come through. And so what happens, though, is that for a long time since contact, tribes have been facing this problem of having their culture exploited. And for example, like Pocahontas, the true story, like we met John Smith and went to Europe. What happens when she got kidnapped and was put into basically what was called a human zoo, her and other people of her tribe and other people of that region. So in Europe, which existed all the way into the 1990s, Europeans would take Native Americans or indigenous peoples and take them to London and have human zoos where people can go over there and look at at the exotic peoples and their primitive savage ways, and look at that one's got a funny nose, he must be crow. And so and this actually persisted, and this continues. I think Neil Lawrence, who I met at NeurIPS, he wrote an amazing little essay in The Guardian called The Data Oligarchies, and of how these large corporations and states have collected data and for not necessarily nefarious purposes, but for creating oligarchies of information. And you start seeing indigenous data as a resource. And so if you start seeing, and so we have all this data, cultural knowledge, cultural stories, cultural, artifacts, and you have the West entities, be it corporate or private or state, taking our data, our cultural information, and exploiting it and repackaging it. Like everyone can go to Hudson's Bay or Walmart and buy a cheap Chinese-made trinket, of the dream catcher.
Dreamcatcher.
Yeah, or even like this his pipe. You can tell that whoever drew this cartoon of Peter Pan didn't know what an actual tobacco pipe looked like, because you can right off the bat, it seems to be made out of granite. It's like entirely stone, which is entirely wrong. And there's a risk here. If you take indigenous knowledge out of context, it actually can be dangerous. For instance, cocaine, or it's a medicine, or like some German, of course, Mr. Baer, I think it was, came over there, found cocaine and said, hey, this is kind of cool. And it gives it kind of effect. And pretty soon you have this whole problem of cocaine. And then, of course, the worst of that is tobacco. North America's gift to the world is lung cancer, because Westerners took a medicine, tobacco, and exploited it, maximized it, and is applying it in an unhealthy way. And so these knowledge, the people, the North American and South American indigenous medicine people have decided that we need to protect ourselves against exploitation and cultural appropriation, which is actually dangerous for the world. Knowing that there are plants out there that are so dangerous that we shouldn't allow them to escape anymore. And this is a risk that we're facing as the technology progresses. Originally, now it's just Disney making a cartoon about us, the Blackfeet with literal black feet, which is harmless in a way. But there's also identifying culture that are intrinsic to the identity of indigenous peoples who are already facing a wealth of socioeconomic problems, and then having their cultural stolen and used in a way that denigrates them or lessens their identity. And this is what we're talking about. And so as building automatic speech recognition, we're collecting a lot of audio, taking in audio from the community with permission, but it's also a lot of sacred information that we're taking in. And so it's important that as we're moving forward with technology, that we're not continuing the same pattern of exploitation, this degenerative cycle of steal, and let the indigenous survive with the scraps. What we really need, what we're proposing here, is a new model of regenerative economics for the community, so they can take their information and their identities and use it in a way that regenerates the community and contributes to the greater society. Through ASR, the people are contributing their voices to build technology that will benefit science, which is humanity, and also fellow indigenous peoples who have a polysynthetic language. But anyways, next slide.
with, for, and by. So this is where we're going to talk a bit about Indigenous protocols for AI, but also just in general, Indigenous protocols. And, something you have to keep in mind, Michael is kind of hammering it in with the banter between the enemy tribes of Northern Cheyenne and Lakota versus Crow, but we're just representatives, two individual representatives of over 600 very, very diverse Indigenous nations all across North America. And so it's really, it's kind of wrong to say Indigenous protocols, but we do realize that there's certain things we have in common. One of them being, we were all colonized by Euro settlers, colonizers, and we all have that experience in degrees of having our land stolen, our women taken, all of these things, and at the same time, there seems to be some common ground on our protocols as well, and so some that I picked out is relationality, which means building relationships, and not just in the case of doing this kind of work, not just helicoptering in, extracting, and helicoptering out, but actually building long-term relationships, and doing all of this with respect, utmost respect, always at the foreground of our actions, of our thoughts. And one of the ways that respect affects our work is that it doesn't make sense, like if Michael and me have this awesome idea of what we want to do, and it's not relevant to that community, to that tribe, then, well, too bad. Then we, it was a great idea, but if it's not relevant to them, it's not going to happen. And it's not our place to push that through or to say, but we want this. And then, of course, reciprocity. And reciprocity can have many different ways of what that could look like. And it can mean, something as I would say basic, not simple, something as basic as building capacity within the community so that community members can start doing their own projects of that kind or a similar kind, whether that is teaching them how to code, or whether it's teaching them how to use specific software for transcribing. It doesn't matter. And again, it depends on what they want. Like if they say, we want you to teach us how to do grant writing, then that's what we're going to teach them, And if they say, we don't want you to teach us anything, we want you to connect us with somebody, then that's what we're going to do. And so that's just a little bit of an introduction on these protocols. And then, of course, always keeping in mind Indigenous sovereignty as well, so that nothing we do takes away the IP ownership. And just having that data sovereignty. And it's really important because, especially in that field of AI where there's, not that many people out there who have that skill and are Indigenous at the same time, it's really important to get that cohesion and working together and making sure, that the people, the engineers who code and have no idea of the cultural knowledge, that they can learn to work with the community respectfully and to bridge the gap that way. So the reason why I included this picture and this slide is because Michael and me, we were invited in March 2019 to participate in a Indigenous Protocols and Artificial Intelligence workshop. and it was great for many reasons. And one of them was that we met some Maori ASR activists, and that was kind of, yeah, that moment where for us the fireworks went off, because realizing that they managed to create automatic speech recognition for the Maori language with only 300 hours of audio and a very, very good word error rate. So it was just like this moment of, it's actually possible. We don't need 10,000 hours of data. We don't need to have hundreds and thousands of people labeling, and you know, it's possible. We can finally do this. And so this was definitely a game changer for Michael and me, because not only did we get to meet these people and work with these people, over 35 participants from all over the world. I have this little map here showing where people were coming from, all these different tribes, and all of us working together on developing these conceptual and practical approaches to building AI systems and infusing them with Indigenous knowledge. And yeah, just amazing work. And also, we got together in the second workshop as a team prototype, and it was an all-Indigenous team of language warriors, Dr. Noilani Arista and Isaac Ikaka Naue Peng. They're both fluent in Hawaiian and knowledge keepers. And then Caleb Moses, the data scientist that had worked on the ASR for the Maori project, Joel Davison, who's Aboriginal Dunguti and Gadigal from the Sydney area in Australia, and then you've already met the two of us, and we used that second workshop as a kind of a hackathon and built this prototype. So inspired by those amazing accomplishments by our Maori friends, we then applied for an NRC, National Research Council of Canada grant, and started working with the Kwakwala language, 4 communities speaking the Kwakwala language up on the North Vancouver Island, with that goal of creating automatic speech recognition. And it was, well, I think it kind of hammered home that recognition to that corpus collection in the traditional way that usually people approach it is a very, very tedious and very slow process. Takes a lot of work, and I forget, I know Sean is in the audience and he might tell you more later.
Maybe to back up a little bit, Caroline, I think you guys were off kilter from the networking. Okay, so what happened was that at the IP AI, Indigenous Protocols AI conference, we met the Maori, and which we'll talk about a little bit soon here, but they had built the automatic speech recognition for their language or their particular there's a family of Maori languages. There's not just one Maori. It's not a monolithic language family. It's a family of languages, and one community, Maori language community, wanted to reclaim their own language to make sure it wasn't taken over by the mythical monolith Maori language. And they built it using only 300 hours of annotated audio, which is basically a miracle, with, at the time, 85% word error success. Word error rate, 15% word error rate. So basically, 85% of the time, they had returned back accurately. And this is false positives and false negatives. recognizing correctly, basically. Those are scientific terms. Sean Sosi, our ML scientist, can explain them better. We'll bring him. You can ask him those questions. But basically, it was very successful with relatively low data. Can you go back?
Okay.
And so inspired by that, we said, hey, this is cool. I talked to my friend Sean Sosi, who's in the audience, and said, we should do this for an indigenous language. What we need to do is our North American language. We need a language that is well documented, and it also needs to have a lot of audio data, documented as in linguistically documented. There's research papers, and the structure and the grammar of the language has been documented. And unfortunately, a lot of languages are not. North America initially had around 7,000, anywhere from 6,500 to 7,000 distinct languages, and we now currently only have 550 and dwindling. And of those 550 languages, only a handful, or maybe in the hundreds, have the documentation of some sort, have the orthography and alphabet and the language documented and the grammar, structurally grammar. So we needed to filter down the languages and make it as easy as possible, because this is cool. This was an entirely all indigenous tech team. A Maori data scientists and the Maori software engineers built their own system. And so we can do that. I know someone smart. I know Caroline. And I used to work for Amazon Alexa, and I know how she works. I mean, what she does, we can't use, obviously, because they require a lot of data, like millions of hours of annotated data. But 300 is tractable. So we began this process, and we arrived at Caroline's PhD advisor was working with the Kwakwala languages and the Kwagyuth. Am I saying that correctly, Caroline? Is the specific?
Yeah, that's one of the communities, the Kwagyuth. So basically the Kwakwakiwak people.
And so the reason why we chose that language is it's one of the, if not the most polysynthetic language in the world, definitely in North America. And next slide, this is where you go. And expanding upon this early work, we then applied for an MIT grant. So we got funded recently, hooray, by the Smith Foundation and the McGowan Foundation and MIT and Sloan and a few other donors that donate to MIT Solve. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, we created the International Waukeshan AI Consortium because the Kwakwala language is part of the Waukeshan language family, which goes from all the way from the most western point in the lower 48, which is Port Hardy or Nia Point. I'm sorry. I'm landlocked. Yeah, I'm landlocked. So there's like a creek and there's a river and a lake. That's all we have. We don't have points, bays, or any of the air sounds in Montana. We have streams. Stick to the rivers. Anyways, So this language comes from all the way from Washington and goes all the way up into northern Vancouver Island. And so we work with the Kwakiutl, with Sarah Child and Maria Pascal with the Makah. And what we're working on now is the scientific agenda, and alongside Connor Quinn, our pocket linguist or pet linguist, or actually we're probably his pets, quite frankly. We're implementing his theories of being able to reawaken languages. I encourage you all to look up Connor McDonald on YouTube, which is actually how we found him, and Caroline has an amusing story we can talk about in the QA. But we're a nearly entirely indigenous community team, and we're working to solve this problem of building polysynthetic ASR because we're working on the most polysynthetic languages in North America. And our goal is that once we solve this technical problem, we can scale this across the breadth of North America, because we all have the same technical challenge. And there's a few others on this journey with us. We're not the only people doing this research. There's Seneca researchers, there's Mohawk researchers, and of course the Maori, and Inuktitut up in Canada. And which leads us to the Maori. And they have this Wired article. And so what they're doing is the summary of this is that there are large corporations that we have technology sitting in our pockets right now, and probably at your computer right now, who are exploiting the Maori. Like we said earlier about cultural appropriation, Maori is a valuable language from an intellectual property standpoint, and it's an interesting language. And people want to learn Maori. People want to do their search in Maori. People want to talk to their phone in Maori, and large corporations want to exploit that. It's marketable, it's commercial, and these people, these individuals, indigenous Maori, who are building their own ASR says, screw that. We are going to build it ourselves. We're going to own the data from ground up, and we're going to make sure that whatever we do empowers the community. And so what they're doing is they're teaching themselves AI, so the community themselves understands what artificial intelligence is, and they're building their own access protocols and protecting the knowledge for themselves. And it's like the perfect model. Honestly, if you're talking about, well, how do we indigenous communities do it? And this is the way. This is but unfortunately, it's difficult. Not everyone is Maori. Not all of us are as cool as they are. And so what we need to do are build cooperatives and collectives and alliances between our tribes, because we do have technical capacity. I am a Cheyenne and Lakota software engineer who knows how to work with big data. And I have a Navajo friend who's got a PhD from Santa Cruz, who's a machine learning data scientist. And we're working with a specific community because we have a objective to broaden and scale this technology. And so we need to operate as a collective community, as indigenous communities together. And what does that look like? It's a complex problem. The fundamental problem of why our intellectual property is being exploited is honestly a PhD paper into world trade law and how Western intellectual property has been set up since the Magna Carta. Like literally the Magna Carta has set this precedence for how indigenous peoples are being violated. But just in short, community knowledge of indigenous is considered public domain. So what that means is that if you have a group of people, like 3 or 4, or maybe even 10 indigenous people, and they sing a song together, that is considered public domain. So you say a big tech can come in with a recorder, record a song from James de Delorme's community, and hopefully I said that correctly. And the way the IP system works is that whoever makes the recording of public domain information, which is indigenous knowledge, owns the information. So they come in, they record Maori data, they put it into their databases, their S3 buckets or their Firebase database. That's theirs now. They own the audio, they own because they own the conveyance of the system. And so what we really need are policy. Like the true solution won't ever happen, quite frankly, is that we need to reform how intellectual property works. And so what's our recourse? Our recourse is to keep it secret. We can stringently enforce our own protection protocols, just how like the Maori are doing, and even the Aboriginals. I've met some Aboriginals in our path toward language reclamation who have entirely offline systems. As Kevin Welch can say, the safest computer is a computer not on the internet. The safest computer is turned off and not on the internet in a Faraday cage with only Kevin knowing where it's at. And so you have tribes actually doing that because they are so worried about sacred knowledge, dangerous knowledge, the next tobacco plant escaping and being exploited and causing millions of people to die of lung cancer. And that exists as a concern among indigenous peoples because we still have this knowledge that has not yet. There are even worse plants out there, even more addictive plants out there that have made a conscious decision not to share. And so that's one path, keep it secret. And the other path right now open to us is open source it, which is what's happening by default because it's being exploited. People see us record our public performances and it immediately goes public domain. And so, but I think there is a third way where we can simply work as communities together and create internal databases that talk to each other. And so we can have this protective processes within our own communities and cooperate And generally, I think what's called in technical terms a data cooperative between communities. And I think we're to sort of enter into the zeitgeist or the spirit of this field of data. Yeah, just maybe if you want to raise your hands, if you have a question, we can give you the stage, or just type it into the.
Yeah, I'm normally not very strict on rules, but I'm going to say we have so many people here tonight to try to avoid anarchy. Either type your questions in the chat or raise your hand. I'm going to humbly ask you, just because, yeah, it could get a little crazy with 65 people.
Hey, there's a comment here from Hamzat. I'm not an IP lawyer. That might work, but if it's a common, like a good example of a public domain is Black Betty or La Bamba. These are stories that kind of went mainstream because they're public domain. So it'd be hard to claim the IP of La Bamba because the cat's already out of the bag. But your version of it, of course, you can probably claim the IP of. Got a comment here from Joss. Do you want to just say it? Joss Lucci. Also, hi, Joss.
Hey, Michael. Good to see you.
Yeah.
So I'm from Zuni, New Mexico, which is one of the Pueblo tribes here in New Mexico. And we have banned outsiders. They're welcome to come to the community, my village, but they cannot record, take pictures, make drawings, because in the past, unfortunately, there have been visitors who have done that and shared it with the outside world. And it's not meant to be shared, or it's not meant for others to copy. And what that has also led to is some of these youth groups like Boy Scouts of America. There's another group in Colorado. They copy some of our ceremonies, which is just very disrespectful. I mean, everything. It's, they talk about cultural appropriations. They dress in our ceremonial garbs and copy our dances, our songs. This is just something that they're not supposed to do, but they did it. And our religious leaders have gone to them and, respectfully asked them to stop. So my tribe has had to make those attempts to these groups. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joss. Sorry, Megan, I didn't see your hand raised earlier. I think I forgot to.
No, good. Hey, Michael. Hey, Caroline. Hi, everybody. It's so great to be with you guys. I'm Megan. I'm from Shift 7, and we work on the MIT Style of Indigenous Communities Fellowship that Michael and Caroline were talking about. The thing that came to mind for me is I agree with you sorry, I got a quick call just there. Didn't pick up. Sorry, my son called me. I agree with you to be very careful on IP. I think that we saw with Facebook that they took all our photos and created deepfakes with really no permission from all of us. And we consistently see this with big tech. And so I think it's really important to be very conservative here for a while. And the thing I would offer is I have a bunch of friends who have been doing patent and other kinds of IP things. A friend of mine was commissioner of the patent office and others. So there might be some colleagues that could come forward to brainstorm also about certain kinds of protections. I was also thinking a little bit of some of the secure clouds that we have in the country for national security things and whether there's a way for the tribes to work together. I think the biggest issue is always infiltration. Someone sneaks in and steals stuff. The way that, a lot of stuff gets breached is by somebody who had bad intention. So it's hard, to be fully technical in some way to solve it, but just noting that I'm really, I think we have seen very bad behavior from not all, but some of the tech companies in ways that show us their hand. And so whether people intended to do something wrong or they had terms of service that allowed them, but they kind of crossed a line that we might think more ethically versus legally, Legally, probably they have permissions and whatever. I can't imagine they broke the law, but they broke the cultural. For me, certainly, Deepface does. So anyway, I'll sort of end there, but that's just a couple of thoughts on really aligning. And then the only last thing is just I'm so thankful for all of the work you guys are doing. And I think it's really urgent. Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein so many years ago, said, should we raise the monster? And I think we do need to bring culture and human wisdom, not just intelligence and smart whatever. It's about wisdom and these things. And so if AI leaves out much of humanity, it's a mistake. And Mary Shelley warned us of this in the 1800s in that writing. So thank you.
So anyways, Dom, I'm sorry. I think hopefully you weren't waiting too long.
First of all, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the presentation, Michael and Caroline. I thought it was great, and lots of knowledge there. And as someone that works kind of like in the AI industry, for want of a better word, I'm particularly interested in ethics. There's some great shows recently, Netflix, Coded Bias, and just really demonstrating how the democratization of technology like AI can, in some ways enrich people and then other ways subjugate people. And I guess my question, what I'm really interested in understanding is kind of like what on-ramps are there for Indigenous youth and Indigenous communities to get involved in coding and in the world of AI? So how can they support Indigenous communities?
I think very carefully would be the response. I think I noticed yesterday, I think it was, Timnit Gebru and announced that her organization, who got wronged by Google very fairly, or unfairly, I mean, is forsaken Google funding. And I think there's going to be this, it's tough. I think I'm going to quote Sean Sosi, if he's still here, like, Indigenous peoples don't have the luxury of working only with friends. And sometimes we have to make deals with people unsavory, even English Canadians are crows, in order to fulfill our objectives. And so I think large corporations who want to work with Indigenous communities need to be conscious that their company will have biases and behaviors that are exploitative. They're not necessarily, I mean, it's hard to, I don't want to monolithically say big corporations are bad. Big corporations are composed of really nice people. Who collectively may accidentally lead themselves into doing something wrong. So you just have to be very conscious of what you're trying to do. And when you're programming for working within Indigenous communities, you just need to have the basic respect of asking permission and being able to accept the answer of no. It's like, it's common for tribes, like I know in the South, there was Josh, maybe you can interrupt me if I get it wrong. There was a sacred mountain with sacred sites on it that was, and they wanted to exploit and mine that mountain, but the local people, I think they were Zuni, I could be wrong, didn't want to tell them where the sacred sites were. They would have rather the sites be destroyed than to have them exploited. And you have this tension of like, they need to keep things secret. Tribes need to keep certain things secret, or they would rather let them be destroyed. Am I getting that right, Josh? You can nod or say no. Like, I mean, you have to like sacred, respect the knowledge. I'm sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, exactly. We keep certain places secret because they're being destroyed, and you're kind of seeing it with the Bear Ears National Monument area. There's people who are going in the area and destroying a lot of the rock art, the petroglyphs. So we have to proactively keep some of these sacred places secret, and we don't, because we don't want anybody else to know about it. And so that's our way of protecting these areas. And yes, there's a lot of the sacred places that we have are located on either mesas or mountain ranges. And depending on the community, they might feel that if it's destroyed, it kind of goes with, how should I say, like it was part of a process, because it's always there too. That's the other thing. But there's also other tribes like my tribe where we actively protect certain areas as well. We built almost like a little fortress for our sacred objects on one of our mesas. So because it's easily accessible, we had to build like a little fortress to protect it from just outsiders, visitors going to the area, because the only people that are able to visit are the religious leaders in my community. Thank you.
Yeah, the short answer, Dom, is that when you work with the tribe, they're going to have different protocols and processes. And I pick on the Crow, but they are very white friendly, so to speak. And they're more than willing to work with large corporations. And they've worked with Google very successfully, I feel, in a partnership to build VR experiences a few years ago. And they, as a tribe, like to make those kind of relationships. My tribe, the Cheyenne, just like Josh's tribe, hate outsiders. And so when you're coming into a community, you have to be aware that there's going to be cultural norms that you might be violating, that they have no interest in working with outsiders. Like you might be saying, hey, here's some free money. And they might say, I'm not interested in it. And that's what you have to deal with. And so getting community support first is important. But anyways, Caroline, do you want to add on to that?
I just wanted to point out one thing that Josh said that might have kind of blown past people's ears, is that even within the tribe, there are different levels of privacy and restrictions. So you can't just say, oh, okay, so I talked to Josh and he said it's okay, so it's fine for everybody. But it's actually, like that sacred area that he just mentioned is only accessible for very specific group of people within the tribe, and not for Josh's sister, for example, And so that's something you just have to keep in mind is what we were mentioning earlier with the Indigenous Protocols. There's very diverse protocols and approaches, but then there's just this general thing that you can say, it doesn't matter which tribe you're working with, whether it's the Zuni, the Crow, the Cheyenne, Navajo, it doesn't matter if you approach these people with respect, and everything else just kind of falls into place.
I just want to thank you all so much for joining us. We really feel humbled and honored that this many people showed interest in our event. And although really all the credit goes to Michael and Caroline's amazing work.
Special thanks to Kevin Welch and EFF-Austin for allowing us to record this meeting for the Plutopia podcast. You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.